she had known for 3 weeks, and she had spent every one of those days smiling. That is the part that stays with you when you hear the story, not the betrayal. Betrayal has been a feature of human relationships since the beginning of recorded time, and as devastating as it is, it follows a recognizable shape. What stays with you is the composure, the patience, the way a woman named Claire Beaumont sat across from her husband at dinner the night before their wedding, looked him in the eyes, poured him wine, laughed at something he said, and gave absolutely nothing away. What stays with you is the precision of what she had built in silence, while everyone around her was focused on flowers and seating charts, and whether the band knew how to play the particular arrangement of the song she had chosen for their first dance. She had chosen everything about that wedding with care. But 3 weeks before it happened, the thing she had chosen most carefully was what she was going to do with what she knew. Claire Beaumont was 31 years old, a senior financial analyst at a regional investment firm in Nashville, Tennessee. She was the kind of person who was described, consistently, and across every context of her life, as composed. Her colleagues said it. Her friends said it. Her mother said it with a mixture of pride and something that occasionally bordered on concern, because there is a version of composure that comes from peace, and there is a version that comes from depth, from a capacity to contain things that most people would need to release immediately. Claire had the second kind. She always had. It had made her excellent at her job, patient in her friendships, and, as it turned out, extraordinarily dangerous when pushed to a limit she had never previously reached. His name was Daniel Ashworth, 35, charming in the way that reads as warmth until you've known someone long enough to understand the machinery underneath it. He had come into Claire's life 3 years before the wedding through a mutual colleague at a conference in Atlanta. He was good-looking in a way that felt approachable rather than threatening. He laughed easily. He asked questions that sounded like he was listening. He remembered small details, the name of her college roommate, how she took her coffee, the reason she had stopped liking a particular restaurant. And those small details, deployed with consistency, create a powerful illusion. They make a person feel seen. And feeling seen is one of the most disarming experiences available to a human being. They dated for 18 months before he proposed. The proposal was thoughtful and private, which she had always said she wanted, which meant he had listened or had gathered intelligence effectively. In retrospect, those two things are not always different. She said yes. She meant it completely and without reservation. She spent the following 14 months planning a wedding that reflected who she was, what she valued, and what she believed the beginning of a shared life should look like. It was during those 14 months, in the specific 3-month window before the wedding, that a woman named Simone Whitfield sent Claire a direct message on Instagram. Simone had found Claire's account through the wedding hashtag Claire had created and posted publicly with a bridal photo. The message was not hostile. It was careful, and it was brief, and it said that Simone believed they were both involved with the same person and that she needed Claire to know something before it was too late to make a different choice. She included a photograph. It was a photograph of Daniel Ashworth standing at what was clearly an altar, in what was clearly a ceremony, with a woman who was not Claire. That photograph had been taken 11 months before Daniel proposed to Claire, in a courthouse in Memphis, with 2 witnesses who signed a legal document. Daniel Ashworth was already married when he asked Claire to be his wife. He had been married the entire time. Claire did not respond to Simone's message that night. She put her phone face down on her nightstand, lay in the dark beside a man she had loved with genuine and complete openness, and breathed. In the morning, when he left for work, she got up, made coffee, sat at the kitchen table with her laptop, and began to verify everything Simone had told her. She was a financial analyst. She knew how to find documentation. She knew how to confirm information without alerting the person being investigated. She found the marriage license within 40 minutes. She found the address. She found that Daniel maintained what appeared to be a second life in Memphis, a city he visited, by his own account, for quarterly work meetings, with a level of structure that suggested years of practice. She closed the laptop. She finished her coffee. She called Simone back. The conversation lasted 2 hours. Simone was 32, a nurse, and had been with Daniel for 4 years, longer than Claire had known he existed. She had not known about Claire until a friend had seen the wedding hashtag and recognized Daniel's face in a photo. Simone had been told the Memphis apartment was Daniel's base during the work week. She had been told the absences on weekends were related to a demanding client account in Nashville. She had been told, in sum, a complete and parallel fiction, one running alongside the fiction Daniel had constructed for Claire, each version of the story perfectly sealed against the other. They talked about how he had done it, the logistics, the compartmentalization, the specific details he had altered in each version of his life to prevent collision. They talked about how well he knew them both, which was perhaps the most disturbing part, because it meant all that careful attention, all those remembered details, had been not love but management. They had each been managed, handled, kept just satisfied enough to not look too closely. And then they talked about what to do. Claire had known that question was coming before she picked up the phone. She had, in the 12 hours since she put her phone face down on the nightstand, already begun to form the architecture of an answer. She was 3 weeks from her wedding. The venue was booked. The flowers were ordered. 214 guests had confirmed attendance. Her family was flying in from 4 states. The dress was hanging in her childhood bedroom at her mother's house, where it had been placed for safekeeping, which now felt like an irony, so precise it could cut. She could cancel. She could walk into Daniel's home office that evening, slide the marriage license across his desk, and watch his face reconstruct itself in real time. She could call her mother. She could call the wedding venue. She could begin the slow, humiliating process of dismantling an event that had taken over a year to build and would take many months of difficult phone calls to undo. She could do all of that, or she could wait 3 weeks. She asked Simone one question: "Are you willing to be part of what I'm thinking?" Simone said yes before Claire had finished the sentence. And so they began. The next 3 weeks were a masterclass in restraint. Claire went to her final dress fitting and told the seamstress it was perfect. She attended the rehearsal dinner at a restaurant Daniel had selected and sat beside him at the head of the table and gave a toast that was warm and specific and made people cry. She exchanged gifts with him the night before the wedding. He gave her a bracelet. She gave him a watch she had selected 2 months earlier and had engraved on the back with a date. She let him put it on his wrist. She watched him smile. She smiled back. She felt no guilt about any of it, which told her something important about the place she had reached inside herself. The guilt had nowhere to attach. He had consumed whatever space guilt might have occupied. The wedding day arrived on a Saturday in late October. Nashville in October has a specific quality of light, warm and slightly amber, the kind that makes everything look like a memory while it's still happening. 214 guests filled the venue. Her bridesmaids were radiant. Her father cried twice before he got to the aisle. The flowers were exactly right. The band played the arrangement she had chosen. Daniel stood at the altar and watched her walk toward him with an expression she had seen before, the one that looked like love, the one she now understood as performance. And she walked toward him anyway. Calmly, steadily, in her dress that fit perfectly. They were married. They signed the documents. They took photographs in the amber light. They went to the reception, which was held in the venue's adjoining ballroom with a ceiling she had specifically chosen for the way it would look with the lighting design she had worked on for 4 months. The dinner was served. The toasts were given. The first dance happened, to the song she had chosen, in a room full of people who loved her. And then the evening arrived at the moment Claire had been working toward for 3 weeks. She excused herself from the head table at 9:45, which was early enough that the party was still at full energy and late enough that the liquor had done its work on the room's collective attention. She walked to the back corridor, met the wedding coordinator she had privately briefed 2 days earlier, and gave a single nod. The coordinator went to the AV booth. Claire walked back to the ballroom. What happened next took 11 minutes. She would know the exact duration later, because she had timed the version she had rehearsed, and the live performance ran almost identically. She took the microphone. She thanked everyone for being there. She said she wanted to share something, which she described as a story, and which she delivered in a tone so even and warm that it took most of the room several sentences to understand what they were hearing. She told the room that 3 weeks ago she had received a message from a woman she didn't know. She said that message came with a photograph. She said that photograph had shown her something she needed everyone in the room to see. And then the screen behind the head table, the screen that had been showing photographs of her and Daniel throughout the evening, the one she had been sent a playlist for and had quietly substituted at the last possible moment, displayed the courthouse photograph, the one from Memphis, the one with Daniel at an altar with a woman who was not Claire. The room did not react all at once. It processed in waves. The people closest to the screen understood first. Then the understanding rippled outward. There was no screaming. There was a specific quality of silence that is louder than screaming, the silence of 200 people simultaneously recalibrating what they are witnessing. Daniel did not move. He sat at the head table with the expression of a person whose internal systems have simultaneously crashed. He had no available response. Every response required an explanation, and every explanation led somewhere catastrophic. He had nowhere to go. He had planned for many contingencies in the construction of his parallel lives, but he had not planned for this room, this screen, and Claire's voice moving through a microphone with the steadiness of someone who had been ready for exactly this moment for 3 weeks. She was not finished. She told the room that the woman in the photograph was named Simone, and that Simone was, legally, still Daniel's wife. She said this without drama and without volume, which made it land with more weight than any version delivered in anger would have achieved. She said she wanted Simone to have a moment, and then she nodded toward the back of the ballroom, where the double doors opened and Simone Whitfield walked in, dressed calm, and carrying a manila envelope that she carried to the head table and placed in front of Daniel without a word. The envelope contained the documentation Claire's attorney had prepared. Divorce proceedings for Simone, initiated and already filed. Civil fraud claims that Claire's attorney had constructed around the financial entanglements of the past 3 years, the joint accounts, the lease agreements, the financial representations Daniel had made in the context of their engagement that constituted, under Tennessee law, a set of actionable misrepresentations. The attorney had been working for 2.5 weeks by the time the envelope landed on that table. Claire then addressed Daniel directly. She said 3 sentences. She said she had loved him completely and had deserved better. She said she hoped the watch she had given him the night before would remind him, every time he checked the time, of the specific evening he had failed to understand who he was dealing with. And she said that she had already spoken with the venue manager about the evening's remaining expenses, which were paid in full, and that everyone in the room should please continue to enjoy the party. Then she handed the microphone back, picked up her glass, returned to her seat, and sat down. For approximately 4 seconds, the room was completely silent. Then one of her bridesmaids, a woman named Jess who had known Claire since college, began to applaud. Slowly, then with full commitment. And the room followed, not immediately, not unanimously, but with a momentum that built from the people who loved Claire outward, until the applause in that ballroom was the kind that physically changes the air pressure of a room. Daniel left. He stood from his chair during the applause, picked up his jacket, and walked out of the ballroom through the same back corridor Claire had used 40 minutes earlier. Nobody stopped him. Nobody followed him. He left the venue in the evening, and the alternate version of his life that he had been running in Nashville for 3 years, and he stepped into whatever came next with nothing to show for it except the watch on his wrist. What came next for Daniel Ashworth was, by most accounts, comprehensive. The video of the reception, shot by the wedding's videographer, who had been quietly briefed and had kept both cameras running, surfaced online within 48 hours. Claire had not posted it. Someone who attended had. By the time she saw it, it had been viewed nearly 600,000 times and was climbing. She made one decision about the video, which was to let it exist without comment. She did not amplify it. She did not reference it publicly. She did not need to. The thing had a life of its own because it was true, and truth travels faster than any engineered campaign. Daniel's employer, a financial services company where he held a senior client relations role, received calls beginning Monday morning. Some of those calls were from people who had seen the video. Some were from journalists. One was from a regulatory body that had questions related to certain financial representations that had surfaced in the documentation Claire's attorney had shared. By Wednesday, Daniel was on administrative leave. By the following month, he had resigned. His family, his parents, his 2 brothers, and the extended network of relatives who had been present at the Memphis courthouse 11 months before Claire's wedding had known. Not all of them, not every detail, but enough. Enough that when the video surfaced, and the Nashville story became a matter of public record, the knowledge that certain family members had been aware of Simone's existence while Daniel was building a parallel engagement in Nashville became its own story. That story reached the people in Daniel's family's professional and social world the way these stories reach people in the digital age, completely, irreversibly, and in a format that can be screenshot and forwarded without any loss of quality. The family that had known and said nothing found itself in the position of explaining the inexplicable to people who asked direct questions. There are very few satisfying answers available to a person trying to explain why they attended a wedding they knew was fraudulent. The attempt to provide those answers, across multiple members of the family in multiple different contexts, produced a set of contradictions that compounded the damage in ways nobody fully anticipated. By the end of the year following the wedding, 2 family members had lost professional positions related to conflicts of interest and credibility concerns. One had lost a community leadership role following a public petition. The structure of a family that had quietly enabled an elaborate deception found that quiet enablement has a retroactive cost, and that cost tends to arrive all at once. Simone's divorce was finalized in 7 months. She had a skilled attorney, a clean case, and the kind of documented financial record that makes proceedings move with unusual efficiency. She rebuilt. It was slower for her than it was for Claire. She had 4 years to excavate rather than 3, and excavation of that depth leaves a different kind of mark, but she rebuilt. The 2 women, who had started as strangers connected by a photograph and a direct message, had become something that defied easy categorization. Not quite friends, not quite allies, something more specific than either. They had walked through the same fire from opposite sides and had found each other at the center of it. That is a bond that doesn't require a name to be real. Claire did not speak publicly about the wedding for 8 months. When she finally did, it was in a long-form piece for a publication that covered professional women's stories, and what she said was more measured and more revealing than most people expected. She did not describe what she had done as revenge. She was specific about that distinction because she thought the distinction mattered. Revenge, she said, implies a desired outcome related to the other person's suffering. What she had done was documentation, public documentation of a private fraud, executed in a context where the people most affected by that fraud, her family, her friends, the 200 people who had traveled to witness what they believed was a legitimate beginning, were present and deserved to know the truth at the same time she was allowing it to end. She said the decision to wait 3 weeks, rather than cancel immediately, had not been about performance. It had been about evidence, about making sure that what happened in that ballroom was something that could not be disputed, that could not be characterized as the emotional response of a woman who had been hurt. She had wanted it to be undeniable. She had wanted there to be no available narrative in which Daniel could position himself as the victim of an exaggerated reaction. By waiting, by proceeding, by sitting in that church and at that reception, and then delivering the truth in a room full of witnesses with documentation already filed, she had made the record complete. There was no version of events that favored him. She had made certain of it. She was asked, in that interview, whether she had any regrets. She considered the question for a moment, visibly and without hurry, the way she did most things. Then she said that her only regret was that she had spent 3 years investing genuine love in a person who had been managing her the entire time. But she said that investment had also taught her more about her own capacity for patience, for precision, for the kind of clarity that only arrives after someone has forced you all the way to your edge, than anything that had come before it. She said she had gone into that relationship trusting herself and had, somewhere in the middle years, begun to outsource that trust to someone who had no right to receive it. The experience of taking it back had been, in its painful and oblique way, the most instructive thing that had ever happened to her. The last question the interviewer asked was what she would say to Daniel if she could say one thing. She smiled, the same smile that people who had been at the wedding described later as the thing that should have frightened him most, the one that was too steady, that held too still. She said she would tell him that the biggest mistake he had ever made was believing that her composure was the same thing as passivity. He had read her patience as approval, her calm as compliance, and her love as something that could be manipulated indefinitely without consequence. He had forgotten, or perhaps had never understood, that the same qualities that made her easy to be around also made her capable of sitting with information for 3 weeks without flinching. That the same precision she brought to her professional life could be brought to bear on anything else that required it. He had seen what he needed her to be, and in doing so, he had missed entirely what she actually was. She had walked down that aisle knowing everything. She had smiled through every photograph. She had held his hand through the ceremony, and said the words she was asked to say, and danced to the song she had chosen. And none of it had moved her off the point she was building toward, because she had already decided that whatever this day was, it was not going to be the day her story broke. It was going to be the day his did, and it was. Completely. Finally. With 214 witnesses, and a camera running, and a manila envelope on a white tablecloth, and a microphone in her hand, and a voice that did not shake. That is what it looks like when you underestimate the wrong person. Not chaos, not collapse, something quieter and far more permanent. She walked in as a bride. She walked out as herself. That was always the better ending.